Hello and welcome. My name is Tom. This is the Enthusiasm Project Season 10, Episode 7. And today we're going to do something we haven't done before, kind of, which is the audio video, the AV Helpdesk. It's something I talked about last week, sort of a spin-off, much like Frasier from Cheers, of a Q&A episode. But where Q&A episodes tend to be a lot of questions with shorter answers, even though sometimes I kind of ramble and the answers are less than short, the AV Help Desk is fewer questions with longer answers, and where the questions are sort of even almost more like case studies in how to handle certain situations or solve certain problems and all that kind of stuff. So that is what we are going to be doing today. I'm really excited about it because sometimes I get questions for Q&As that are great, but they're just a little too long or a little too in-depth, and it's like, I can't include this with, 20 other questions. But it's a thing I really want to talk about, a thing I really want to include, and I think this is sort of the perfect way to do it. So that's what we are going to do today. Super excited about that. Audio gear. Let's talk about audio gear because it all changed at the very last second before I started recording today. I was all set up to record using the Mackie DLZ Creator, which I've only used a couple of times. And I had everything set and ready to go, and then started doing test recordings, listening to how I sounded, and then, how I sounded in my headphones, and then how the recordings sound, and they are not the same. It's very frustrating. The problem I was having was the noise gate on that thing was so aggressive. It was doing the thing where it was like where it's cutting off the beginning and the. I was doing that as an effect, by the way, to demonstrate that wasn't an audio glitch, but it sounds like that because the noise gate is so aggressive. It cuts off like the beginning and end of words, even when I adjusted it to not be aggressive. So then I put a condenser mic on, I turned off the noise gate, and then I was still getting that result in the recordings, and I have no idea why. I really like the DLZ Creator. I need to use it more, but it's like the workflow and the frustration, and just even then trying to get it. I used it last night on a thing and it worked fine via USB, and then today it will not work via USB. So it's like, I know it's just, anyway, I'm on the Rodecaster Duo because I just got so fed up, and I wanted to use the SM7B, which is what I am using. And I dialed in this preset that I made on the DLZ for the 7B, and I thought it sounded terrific, and I was really excited about it. But then, playing back actual recordings, because the SM7B is such a quiet microphone, it was like the noise gate. I was just the noise floor. It just did not sound good on the recording, even though it sounded phenomenal through my headphones. And so I got frustrated, and I was going to use the Earthworks, but it's like I wanted to use the 7B today. So anyway, I'm on the Rodecaster Duo with the SM7B. I started with the SM7B preset, and then I dialed it in just a little bit for my specific voice. So this is what it sounds like with processing. If I push this little button here, this is now what it sounds like without any processing. So that is pretty fun. I mean, this sounds pretty decent, but I like it a lot more with the processing. And I don't know, it's just fun. I've been wanting to kind of like play around more with the SM7B again, and then back on the Rodecaster Duo because it does everything we need. I was having to rig up like a 3.5 millimeter output into the Mackie. Now I can just bring in questions via USB. I even got my Casio keyboard connected because I was using that for a thing yesterday. And that is, fun fact, here, let me play some sweet jams for you. Yeah, fun fact, this is the Casio. I can't turn this down. Sorry. Let's just stop it. This is the Casio SK5. And as you can tell by the dog barks and maybe even the laser sounds, it's the exact same keyboard that they use in Bob's Burgers for Gene's keyboard sound effects. It's just a Casio SK5, which is super exciting. I had one as a kid and then bought this one on eBay like 10 years ago. And it's really fun. And I used to bring it to school and annoy my students with it because for some reason the dog barks make me laugh a lot. So anyway, I've got that connected to the Rodecaster. I've got my USB stuff happening for questions. And of course, I've got my smart pads and all that fun stuff. So we should be all set and ready to go. And I think that's going to be, really fun. I'm excited to go through some of these. I've got 4-ish questions. And the first one is quite long. This is from Drew, who from Grimlock Media. He has done He's been on the podcast before. He gave me my Seattle Kraken hat that I've been wearing constantly. It probably is a little stinky at this point, actually, but I love it. Drew is awesome, and Drew had a problem with a project he was working on a couple weeks ago, and he had sent in a whole video thing for the Q&A episode, but I just couldn't get it in time, and it was sort of the catalyst for doing this episode. So that's what we're going to start off with, and I really like Drew's I really like his example because it's a perfect storm, but it's also a perfect case study of like things going wrong when doing a project for a client, trying to troubleshoot, and also trying to save things for a client, because it sucks anytime something goes wrong. But if you're doing something for yourself, at least you kind of only have yourself to blame or to deal with. If you're working with clients, then there's like a lot more pressure. Maybe there's a payday involved. It can be pretty difficult. So what I like about this is Drew sets the stage. He has some examples. I have some examples too to share, and he kind of walks you through the whole thing. So I'm gonna play his question that he sent in. He sent in an audio question, and I'm going to kind of like probably stop it and interrupt it at a few different points just to point things out. But I think this is a great chance to hear about a problem, try to diagnose the problem, and then try to figure out like, okay, if this were you in your shoes, in his shoes, what would you do to, in this situation where a client is, expecting you to do stuff. So let's start off with Drew. What's new, Drew? Take it away.
Hey, Tom. How's it going? Drew with Grimlock Media here. I just want to say thank you. And I appreciate you helping everybody out with the AV Helpdesk, as you called it. So with that being said, my question to you was because I had an issue, an audio issue that was coming through my Rodecaster Pro. I was out on a production shoot for a podcast for a local magazine. So I did my test recording, and when I played it back, it sounded absolutely horrific. It sounds to me almost robotic, but it also kind of sounded like there was some kind of frequency or there was something that was getting in the way, that was screwing up the signal. Here is a real quick snippet of the audio.
Thank you so much for having me on this interview. I'm very grateful. So I grew up in Northeast Colorado.
So there you go. I won't play any more than that because it sounded exactly like that all the way through the entire recording.
I'm going to pause real quick right there. This is what I used to do in my classroom, having flashbacks, like play something, pause, talk, play something, pause, talk. So just to set the stage for the situation that Drew's in, he did a great job. There's a couple other things I want to point out. Drew's audio that he's recording right now that you're listening to, and he'll explain this later, is the exact same setup he was using for these clients. So his audio that we're hearing the question from, I think sounds phenomenal. Like it is so clear, it's so crisp, it sounds great. That's the exact same thing that he was using for the clients, and then got that weird robot sound. This was all done on the Rodecaster Pro 1. So if you've done client work and you've done the thing where you test everything out. I mean, just yesterday, for example, the Mackie DLZ that I talked about, I used it via USB, the DLZ via USB last night. Totally fine. Today, not fine. Even last week, my Sony 24mm lens broke, which is very frustrating. Like the focus ability, both auto and manual, just died on the lens. I used it on Friday, just in my studio for a podcast interview. The camera didn't even move. The lens is just sitting there, worked great, turned the camera off. Saturday, Sunday went by. Monday morning, I went in to go record something. Lens was dead. It's so frustrating when you test things out, everything's working great, nothing changes, you don't touch anything, and then the next time you use it, it doesn't work in some way. So that's kind of the situation Drew is in, but I wanted to point out that what we're hearing him explain this on is the exact same setup with the exact same settings that gave that weird robot-y voice. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Drew. Take it away.
I ended up still recording through the Rodecaster, but in order to alleviate the issue, I grabbed my Rode NTG shotgun microphone. slapped that on the top of my camera and did the best that I could to just get the entire production recorded with the Rode NTG, with the shotgun microphone. I got a lot more background noise. There is a running waterfall that was in the backdrop. I will play you a quick snippet of that so that you can kind of get an idea, or I guess a better idea, of what I was talking about.
Magazine. My name's Melissa. I'm our founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're here talking with Emily of Living Wild, a holistic lifestyle company and retreat center at the beautiful Secret Garden Estate in Stanwood, Washington.
So yeah, there you go. You could see I was at least able to get both the interviewer and the interviewee, but there was a lot of background noise with that waterfall. You had said that you thought that it might be a bad XLR, which it very well could be, but I wanted to recreate that scenario out on production day as best I could. So I'm actually currently using everything that I was using that day. I set it up as best as I could in the identical way that it was set up. So I have two A7 IVs. Those are plugged into, auxiliary power? I don't know. They have power cables plugged into them. They also have HDMI cables. Those HDMI cables go to a ATEM Mini Pro, which is plugged into my laptop, which was running OBS. I have two Shure MV7s that were running XLR cables to boosters. I have the FET heads, which are then plugged into the Rodecaster Pro. The settings for my Rodecaster from both channels, all I have is big bottom. I have de-esser, and I believe that might be it. Additionally, the only other thing that I had was my overhead light, which is a Nanlite 60B. So the reason I mentioned all of that is because it's a lot of wires, it's a lot of power, and the XLR cables did have to go straight through that spaghetti monster of wires and cables and everything. As you're listening to it now, it sounds just fine. Of course, that in itself is puzzling me. I don't know what that means. You had also mentioned that you thought that maybe one of the buttons on the Rodecaster Pro got pressed because it did almost sound like that fake robot voice from the old like Fisher-Price megaphones. Yes, I'm that old as well. Yeah, not really quite sure. If you have any more ideas on what it might be, if any of your listeners possibly have an idea of what it might be, any insight is massively, massively appreciated. Again, thank you so much. I hope you and Heather are having fantastic days, and I will catch you later. Bye, Tom.
All right. Thanks again, Drew. And unfortunately, I don't have like a silver bullet solution for this problem, and Drew and I have kind of talked since he sent this in to try to figure it out, because originally I said, well, it could be a faulty cable, or a cable getting interference. And it sounds a little too digitally. And I have my Rodecaster here. So it has these effects. I don't know what this will sound like. Let's
see if I do. Oh, this doesn't sound like that.
This doesn't sound like that. What about
if I do like the robot? It almost sounded like this.
But unless I'm mistaken, Drew's using the Rodecaster 1, which doesn't have those effects. So it doesn't make sense that it would have gotten latched. And the reason I thought that is because I think that there was a batch of Rodecaster 2s that had like faulty smart pads. I don't know this for sure. I just know that it seems like for a few months last year, I was getting so many questions, and people were even sending me like clips and videos of their Rodecaster Pro 2s, like triggering the pads automatically, the pads not working when they're supposed to. It was almost like they had a mind of their own. That problem I haven't heard about it as much lately. So I think maybe it was a thing that happened and then got addressed and fixed. So I thought maybe Drew had one of those units, and, unfortunately, like,
his little robot voice got turned on, and that's what his recording sounded like.
But it didn't sound, I'm sorry, that sounded so weird. But it didn't sound exactly like that. I've heard things that sounded like it. If you didn't, let's see, like the worst example was this. Here, I have a clip I can play.
Welcome to the first recorded.
Oh wait, sorry. No, that's the saved one. I swear I practiced for this. This one right here.
Acre farm. I'm from 2 generations.
That sound, I've heard that before, and I don't know what. It almost is like a de-esser or a parametric equalizer kind of going crazy. So I don't know. And my thought was XLR cable being faulty because I've had that happen. But electronic interference, and I like that Drew explained he was running the XLR cables, HDMI cables, power cables, lighting cables, all of this stuff. It is totally possible for cables to have interference, especially if you're using like lower end cables, but it usually doesn't sound quite like that. It's usually more of like a high pitched whine that just won't go away. It's almost like it's an additional sound in the signal. It doesn't like distort the signal. So I'm not sure. Maybe I don't know if it was a cable issue or not. It really sounds like when I go into Adobe Audition and I play around with like a de-esser or something like that, and I like flip the settings too aggressively or I invert it. It's like almost what that sounds like, but I have a hard time imagining that you would accidentally do that on the Rodecaster. I don't even know if it'd be possible or not. And then the other thing I had, which I forgot to ask Drew, was if this was the recording from OBS because you're combining audio and video, or if this is what it sounded like on the Rodecaster's recording itself, or if you were recording, and I don't know if you were doing dual recording, solo recording, or whatever it might be. So that got that robotic sound. I don't really know what it is, but I'm totally, if you know what it is, if you're like yelling at your speaker and you're like, it's this, please like leave a message at hi-my-name-is-tom.com or send an email to tom@enthusiasmproject.com, however you want to reach out. So that way next week we can like share it with Drew. Even if it's not a help desk episode, we can still kind of solve this problem. But what I appreciate about this, and I wish I had a silver bullet solution, but if we're talking about the help desk and you're somebody who finds yourself in this situation where you needed to go do something for a client, things didn't work, what do you do? This is where it's really interesting to me because I think Drew did everything perfectly. One, he tested everything as much as he could. Like he set it all up. Everything was sounding great. He had every reason to believe it was going to sound good. And then something went wrong. He was able in the moment to do something to bypass that weird, terrible recording sound and get at least something where you could hear people, even though unfortunately it's like the worst scenario. Like, yeah, don't worry. You have have extra mic that you can use for the talent, but there is a running waterfall behind them. It's like, yeah, there's just a man with a jackhammer next to the microphone. It's like the worst possible recording situation, but you managed to do it. The tough part in these situations is dealing with like client expectations and it can just be a little bit tricky because you have a worst case scenario, right? In these, we've all sort of done this. At least I have. I won't speak for you. I've done this, and I know lots of people who have done it, where you do a project for somebody and you make a mistake and the whole thing is ruined. Like an SD card, it gets formatted, or something wasn't recording when you thought it was. If you've ever pressed a camera to stop recording and then the camera starts recording because it wasn't on in the first place, you know that feeling of your heart sinking. And you learn from those lessons, and you learn, I did that even just recently with that video where I took the memory card out and screwed up the whole thing and spent 3 days trying to recover footage, and then learned like, hey, always have that backup SD card recording. So the worst case scenario is you've got nothing, right? Like you recorded this thing, people took time out of their day. There was this whole interview thing that went down, you set up for it, and now there's nothing to show for it because the quality is just not good and it doesn't work. That's the worst case scenario. You didn't do the job you were hired to do and you wasted everybody's time. I'm not saying you did that, Drew. I'm just saying someone in this case, that's the worst case scenario. So from a professional working for client standpoint, what would the next thing be that you do? We've all been in these types of situations, I think. Sometimes though, I think then you can go, if the worst case scenario is that this whole thing is a wash and I'm going to go change my identity and go into witness protection. The second to worst scenario is to see about reshooting. So you listen to this audio, everybody sounds like robots. Obviously, no one's going to want to put that on a podcast or YouTube channel or their social media. So you can ask if you can reshoot. That, in terms of getting the best result, production-wise, is the best option, because then you can just, you know what to double check, triple check, redundancies on redundancies, so that way everything sounds good and you're good to go. The problem with that is obviously scheduling. Like, people already, in this case, you had the 2 people you were interviewing. I'm going to go ahead and guess there might have been 1 or 2 other people around. People shifted their days around. People found a location. Maybe that inconvenienced other people who then needed to stay out of that location for that time. And now you're going to have to ask them to do that again. So that is very inconvenient for your client. And it also, the only way to do that is to literally admit to everybody that you messed up. Like, you could blame your gear or whatever you want to do, but it's like, ultimately the person we hired to do this thing messed up and now it didn't work. So we have to redo everything, which is embarrassing and definitely, not something that, if you're working as a professional, it's not something that you want on your record. But it definitely happens, and you can fix anything from a production standpoint. But from a content standpoint, even if everyone's totally cool with reshooting, unless you're doing something that's like absolutely scripted, it can be really tough to capture lightning in a bottle. In this case, you're doing an interview. I know that people prepped for it. I'm sure they knew what questions they were going to ask, but the tone of voice, the way they responded, that first, the fact that it was like the first time with those questions and that enthusiasm and that excitement, it's going to be very hard to like redo that. And then people, especially if they're not used to doing this sort of thing, they will start to forget what they did and didn't say. So they might leave something out because they remember saying it the first time and they don't want to repeat themselves, forgetting that they haven't said it yet the second time. So reshooting, even though that can get you the best quality production-wise, sometimes then gets you less than great actual like content that you're recording. And so that's frustrating. It also means if you're being paid, you're working with a client, that reshoot, they ain't paying you to come out and do a reshoot. Like, that is money and time out of your own pocket, probably, to do that. So what else can you do then? Let's talk about how to fix this, because here's the scenario I'm imagining. And this is drifting away from Drew's situation. Drew was able to work it out and things are good. But I just think this situation that he was in is just very common. And so let's put ourselves in it and figure out what we could do. You go out and you film this thing, you come back to your office, you check your files, and this is what you hear. You start having a panic attack and throwing up in your mouth a little bit, and then finally you're like, okay, what do I do? Do I change my name? Do I ask to do a reshoot? Do I try to fix this? And I think, especially in 2023, it's very reasonable to go, maybe there's a software solution I can do to fix this. There is a bunch of different ways. So obviously, like, my first impulse was, what if I went into Adobe Audition and tried to play with the EQ or tried to use that spectral frequency thing where you can remove specific frequencies and clean up this audio. And I was like kind of being able, especially if you use like a 30 band equalizer, you can narrow in on some pretty specific frequencies, modify them, remove them, and then you can make it sound a lot better. But it didn't sound great, and it was taking a lot of time, and then it's going to take a lot of time to do that. So then I thought, hey, what about more modern tools? Not that Audition is old, but like, it's the year of AI, and as sick as I am of hearing about AI related things, Adobe Podcast AI is very interesting to me, and I haven't used a lot of it, but I have used their enhanced speech thing several times, which right now is in beta and totally free. So I'll put a link in the show notes to this. It's called Adobe Enhanced Speech. There are some limits, but they're pretty generous. Like, right now, you can only upload a 1-hour file. You can only do 3 hours of audio a day, and the file size is limited to 500 megabytes. But if you have like a 2-hour podcast, you could just split your bad audio into 2 files and upload that, or just do stuff over multiple days, and that's totally okay. And it's very basic right now. Like, you go and you just drag your file, it works its magic and gives you another file to download. And you can't like adjust any settings or preferences or anything like that, but it is pretty magical. So I took some of Drew's audio and ran it through Adobe Speech Enhance. So let's start with, here, to show you kind of a better example, actually. I took the one that Drew the usable audio where he had to take his Rode Video Mic NTG, put it on the camera, and then point it at his subjects who were in front of a waterfall, and then ended up getting audio that sounded like this.
Welcome to the first recorded interview with True Northwest Magazine. My name's Melissa. I'm our founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're here talking with Emily of Living Wild, a holistic lifestyle company and retreat center at the beautiful Secret Garden Estate in Stanwood, Washington.
Okay, so that audio there, you can hear the people, you can hear them, but the waterfall is as loud, if not louder than they are. So nobody could probably listen to an hour of that or anything, and it's going to be pretty distracting. If it's a quick social media clip, you could throw on subtitles and it might help. But anyway, I took that audio, just that little clip, ran it through Adobe Speech Enhance, and then this is what it sounded like.
Welcome to the first recorded interview with True Northwest Magazine. My name's Melissa. I'm our founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're here talking with Emily of Living Wild, a holistic lifestyle company and retreat center at the beautiful Secret Garden Estate in Stanwood, Washington.
So I think that sounds way better. It doesn't sound perfect. It's not like, wow, were they actually in a podcast studio the whole time? No, you can still hear the waterfall. Her voice sounds like some frequencies are it's starting to sound a little bit unnatural, but it's way, way, way more listenable than, having the big waterfall in the background. And then in theory, once you have that and you have the most distracting noise taken out, maybe you could put that in your own editing software and then manually go in and fine tune it to try to make it sound a little bit better. But then I had an idea to do something I've never done before. So Adobe Speech Enhance, I discovered a few months ago when I completely messed up the audio for a video I was working on, and I needed to save it, and I just did it as a Hail Mary pass, and it totally worked and saved the audio. It even made the audio sound too good, like it was too, I forget exactly which video it was, but it almost sounded like too in studio up close, so I had to end up mixing in some of the bad audio with the good audio to kind of make it sound more natural. But in this situation, I decided, what if I took the file that Adobe, it let me download, and then I re-uploaded that file and had it process that. So essentially ran it through Speech Enhance or Enhanced Speech twice. So this was the second time that audio was enhanced.
Welcome to the first recorded interview with True Northwest Magazine. My name's Melissa. I'm our founder and editor-in-chief, and today we're here talking with Emily of Living Wild, a holistic lifestyle company and retreat center at the beautiful Secret Garden Estate in Stanwood, Washington.
So again, it doesn't sound perfectly natural, but that background noise, let's go back and here's a quick clip of what it sounded like originally.
Welcome to the first recorded interview with True Northwest Magazine.
All the way to this.
Welcome to the first recorded interview with True Northwest Magazine.
I think that's pretty good. And I think you could probably take that, like I said, and throw that into your audio editor of choice and then, fine tune it. It's never going to sound like I sound right now, like I'm in a dedicated studio for recording audio. It's never going to sound quite like that or quite that natural. I hope this sounds good and natural, but that is quite usable, especially thinking how a client might want to use this. If you mess up the audio and their plan was to do like a big long form thing, it might be tough to use any kind of bad audio in long form. But what if they're doing short form? What if they're doing a shorter clip or actual short form content? Then this is more than usable for that, especially throw a little background music behind it. So that way it kind of covers up some of those missing frequencies. But then I decided, okay, this original audio clip, the robot clip that sounds like this,
I'm very grateful. So
that is a wash. And that's why Drew had to go, okay, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to pull out just the other mic that I have, the video mic, and just do the best I can with that. But I decided to see what Adobe would do with that clip. So this was after I ran it through Adobe Enhanced Speech one time.
I'm very grateful. So I grew up in Northeast Colorado on a 200-acre farm.
It sounds, you can hear what she's saying. You can hear some of that weird frequency still in there. It almost sounds like now I've given her a bit of a speech impediment, but it's significantly better than this.
I'm very grateful. So I grew up
So we went from that to
from 2 generations of
this, and then I thought, well, I'll just put that through a second time. So this is what it sounded like after I enhanced it a second time.
I'm very grateful. So I grew up in Northeast Colorado on a 200-acre farm.
Again, not perfect, but I can hear what she's saying. And then I bet it'd be easier to go into like a 30 band equalizer, which I didn't try to do, and then pull out some of those really like harsh frequencies and make things sound a little more natural. But this, I don't know that anyone would want to listen to necessarily like a full hour of
I'm very grateful.
this
So I
quality,
grew up in Northeast Colorado.
but I could definitely feel like you get usable stuff for social media out of that for sure. So that's like, that was kind of a Hail Mary pass of using this AI tool, but I think there's something there. I definitely think there's something there in terms of, okay, I don't know that you could take this audio and make it sound to the point where the client would not know that something was wrong, but you could at least present a solution to them. Say, hey, there was some really weird thing going on with the audio that day. I'm not sure what it was, if it was interference or some kind of issue, but here's what I was able to do. And this is what I was, you're not just saying it didn't work, it sounds bad. You're saying it didn't work the way we wanted it to, but here's what I did. And we have this, and maybe there's some way we can use this, and then see what they say. I think, it's always good. It's always good to bring solutions, right? When you have situations like that, it's always just nice to be able to bring a solution. So how then, and again, I'm not even directing this necessarily at Drew, but just using this situation as a case study, how could you avoid something like this in the future? I'm sure Drew was aware of these things, but I'm just pointing it out for the sake of this discussion. Testing is the number one thing to do. Like what Drew did was exactly right. Take all your gear out, set it up, test it, and make sure it sounds good. That's what I did before this podcast, was do a test recording with the DLZ where it was sounding amazing in my headphones. And then when I played it back, it was not sounding good. And that's why I'm really, really glad that I didn't figure that out after recording however long this episode ends up being, because it would have been really hard to listen to and very ironic to listen to a Helpdesk quote unquote episode that has a technical problem in it. And I need to knock on some wood here to not jinx myself for this audio being messed up. So testing is good. But clearly, even when you do that, weird stuff can still happen. Just like my camera lens. There was nothing changed. That lens didn't even get touched from the last time it was used, and it worked perfectly. Turned it on again and it died. So what else can you do to avoid that? Obviously, getting to a place early is good. So if you know that your recording is supposed to start at, 9 a.m., but you can get there an hour early, get everything set up, and then just do some test recordings and then potential troubleshooting before anyone else gets there. Maybe you can catch these problems. Sometimes you can't always get into a place early, depending on the scheduling or whatever, it's not always possible. But if you can, literally setting everything up and building in some time to do some tests before anybody else's schedule is impacted can oftentimes help you at least identify potential solutions. Then, what do you do if you find a solution? Because in this case, I don't know if Drew found this solution. I don't know that he'd be able to, or found this problem. I don't know that he'd be able to find a solution for it right away. He would just be stuck with these people like, oh my God, my audio isn't working the way I wanted it to. What do I do? And that's where I think it's always important to have some kind of redundancy. It's so good that he had the Rode VideoMic NTG, so that way there was something there to catch audio. The downside being that it was not the ideal mic to use in that situation, because you're using one mic for two people in front of a waterfall. So it's not the same as the quality he would have gotten using two dynamic microphones positioned really close to the speaker like my SM7B is right now. But what if he had two VideoMic NTGs, or two of those mics that he could run with a long auxiliary cable and then just even boom them in frame? They could be boomed out of frame, I guess, sorry. I'm trying to have too many thoughts at one time here. If he knew there was a problem and he wasn't going to use the MV7s, then you could just put the video mics on the mic stands that the MV7s were on, put them right in front of the person's mouth, and then now each camera, each of the A7 IVs in this case, would have an audio signal going through it, and then you just mix those afterwards and you're done. If you're doing it for redundancy's sake, though, where you're not, you assume your main audio is working really well, but you want a backup going, then that's where you could boom those out of frame. I've had a lot of those like $15 to $20 mic stands that you can buy on like Amazon. I think I had one from like Radio Shack back in the day, and just put some counterweights on those or some sandbags, have those boomed out of frame. It's not going to sound the same as the dynamic mic in front of the person, but having the two mics, one for each speaker, directional, maybe pointing away from, in this case, they'd be pointing above the person, but away with the waterfall behind them, would help get rid of some of that sound. And then, if you found out a situation where your Rodecaster audio wasn't working, your main audio wasn't working, you already have something good built in to save the day. And again, nobody else even needs to know. It's like having the two memory cards in my camera now. If I take the memory card out and realize, oh man, I took it out too fast and the file didn't finish and I messed everything up, it's okay. I'll just go grab the other one and then everything is fine. And that's where like redundancy, is kind of key. In this case, I know Drew mentioned OBS, so I think that was the main recording, but then also having the Rodecaster recording on its own, which is something I've always done. If I ever use the Rodecaster to record a podcast into Ecamm or something, or I'm doing an interview with someone, or even I'm a guest on their show, I just always have my Rodecaster recording as well. Even if most of the time I never need that audio, at least I know on my end, if nothing else, I'll have a clean version of my audio to use. And that has come in handy a couple of times. And then the other option in a setup like this, because it is a video podcast, he's got two people, the visual appeal of the framing is good. Obviously, it's working as a marketing piece for a company. So, you kind of need it to look a certain way, is to maybe use some kind of small, what I would do, honestly, is get at least two of the Zoom F2s, the little tiny recorder, the 32-bit float recorder. Take those. They come with a little microphone that's actually surprisingly decent, and then just have one of those recorders on each person with a little lav mic. The lav mic will show up in the shot. People might wonder when they're watching it, like, why is there a lav mic and a dynamic mic in front of the person? Like, there's a podcast mic and person has two microphones. Why? It's okay. If you watch any important stuff on television ever, like when a president speaks or something, they usually have two microphones on the podium, not because they're using both microphones at the same time, but because there's a chance something can go wrong. Like at least the US president always has two Shure SM57s right on the podium. And that's because I know in the 80s, it used to be like all the networks had all their microphones and it would be like 40 microphones on the podium. But for the past, I don't know, couple decades, it's just been two microphones. And that's because even they know that even if nothing is moved, like we set up a microphone, it just has an XLR cable going into a mixer or something could go wrong. So there's a backup microphone right next to it. And us as the listening public never know when they have to switch between those microphones because it's never an issue, honestly. So doing something like that, you have this backup recorder. A lavalier mic's not going to probably sound as great as a dynamic mic in front of their face would sound, but it would sound really good compared to the robot voice. And then the 32-bit float audio means that you're not going to have to worry about clipping or setting your levels or anything like that. And it's pretty foolproof, and there's no frequencies. It's not a wireless unit, so you don't have to worry about more interference or anything, which is good if you travel a lot to different locations and you don't know what kind of potential interference you could be dealing with. Having a standalone recorder for your talent or for the people you're working with is really important. So that's what I would do, is give each person it looks like a little wireless pack, and then it has a lavalier microphone. Get them mic'd up with that, press record, and then just forget about those. You'll probably never need them. Set up your normal setup, and then if something goes wrong, you have that lavalier audio. That's something I would do. And those are, I think they're like $160 for the recorder and a microphone. They're not crazy expensive, and that's what I would always have on me, just to make sure that I have redundancies on redundancies. So I would have that happening there, potentially maybe then a boom mic or boom mics out of frame, one or the other, then recording internally to like a Rodecaster, and then recording also into the computer to OBS or Ecamm or whatever software you might want to use. So that I really hope Drew has been able to figure this out. But if you know what the heck might have happened to cause this problem, especially remembering that he's using a Shure MV7 through a FET head on a Rodecaster Pro 1, so let me know, and we can pass that message along to him next week. And thank you, Drew, very much for sending the message, for explaining everything, for being patient with me, and I really appreciate it. You're the very first case study on the AV Help Desk. That's pretty awesome. And now we're going to move on to another message, not quite as an in-depth one as that, but something that this is one of the ones that makes me sad. I'm doing an audio-only episode. This is from returning to the show. This is from Steve Martin. Not the one you're thinking of, which I'm sure he gets so tired of hearing that, but Heather and I just watched Only Murders in the Building, which is an awesome show on Hulu if you have not seen it. It's Steve Martin and Martin Short, and it's amazing. But this is from friend of the show, Steve Martin, who has a question more about editing, and it's a video. He sent in a video, so I get to watch the video as this plays, and I just need to let Steve know. I think I already sent you an email about this, but it looks really great. Your setup's awesome. He also posted some stuff on the message board that I put together recently and got some feedback for even how to improve the setup and everything there. So let's listen to Steve. What you got for us?
Hey Tom, Steve here. I have a small channel called My Photography Journey. Little shameless plug there. And I'm a big fan of your work, and it's definitely listening and watching your content that's made me kind of want to get mine out there and do something about it. 8 months ago, I think it was, I put my first video out, and I have made one a week since then, and gradually got more and more used to talking to the camera, to how I set everything up, coming up with ideas and things like that. And it's something that I absolutely love. I mean, I'm just about to record a video now on my Nikon 35mm 1.8S lens, and I really like it. A sneak peek. So my little channel now has about 400 subscribers, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I can't believe that many people actually want to listen to me talk about cameras and Lightroom and photography. It's just one of those things that has just grown, and I can't believe I get to do this, and I get to play with all these toys. I mean, I've not made a single penny. Actually, that's wrong. I sold a photo on Wirestock for 32 cents. So I am now a professional photographer, I think, but I won't be quitting my day job anytime soon. It's something that I would never have thought to do before. And I just wanted to send you a quick message to say a couple of things that have resonated with me from your podcast recently. Have Your Break is great. So I hope you've really enjoyed that and found it really fulfilling and restorative, and got you back to where you were before. Not noticed a gap in your videos or anything. It was only the podcast episode that was missing, but that gave me a chance to go back and listen to an old one, which gives me a question. Did you ever get your grandfather's ham radio call sign? So it's 21 degrees here in the UK. I've got my iced coffee. 21 degrees in the US, it's this. And I just wanted to say that I use DaVinci Resolve for my editing and really enjoy it. And it's certainly a good one to learn. I think everyone seems to be doing that at the moment, but I used it because it was free. And I've recently upgraded to the studio version, but that was only so that I could get the toy of the kind of speed editor keyboard, which looked quite good fun. But that brings me to another point that you made about there being no basic tutorials. It's too much personality and things like that at times. And that's something that I'm trying to do on my channel, is that I am trying to do some Lightroom tutorials, which are starting out with the very basics. I want them to be 10 minutes long. 1, keyboard shortcuts. 1, what the different modules do. 1 of them, what histograms are, and things like that. So trying to keep them into small bite-sized pieces. Mainly for me, because I find that I learn things by teaching other people, and I've done that forever. And it's one of those things that's when I really understand it. So making these videos is as much for me as it is for anyone else. And if anyone can learn from that, then that's fantastic. And that is something that I really want to put out onto YouTube, into the world, so that other people can learn like I've learned from other people. Thank you for all your inspiration, and I hope you had a very nice, well-earned rest, and welcome back.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. This wasn't a direct question, but it's a really good jumping off point. So I had talked to Steve after he sent this and kind of explained how I wanted to use it to talk about DaVinci Resolve for a little bit, because I think that is a good topic. But also, no, I have not yet gotten my grandpa's ham radio call sign, and I should. And he was a ham radio operator. Well, not his whole life, my whole life, and since before I was born. And I still remember his call sign, and it is available. And somebody reached out like a year ago and told me like, oh, this is how you could go about getting it. And then it could be your call sign, but I haven't done that yet. And I need to do that. And this was a good reminder to do that. So I appreciate that, Steve, very, very much. And congrats on the channel growth and congrats on becoming a professional. 32 cents. You've not only not made a penny, you've made now 32 cents. Maybe more since then. Maybe the channel's even grown because I know this video was actually sent a couple of weeks ago. But a couple of things that Steve brought up here that I thought would be cool to talk about in this little help desk episode are not only DaVinci Resolve, because I have a lot of thoughts on that, but also I don't want to tell anyone how to do anything, but this situation you could find yourself in when you're starting out on YouTube. Like Steve's now been going for 8 months and he's been doing a video a week, and you can tell that he looks and feels comfortable on camera at this point. A lot, like the reps and the hours put into it have paid off over the months, and that's a great thing. And when you make your YouTube channel, you often find yourself wanting to put your personality in there. If it's, something personal like a vlog, that's easy to do. But if you're doing reviews and tutorials, it's always, I think, pretty difficult to walk that line between, here's your personality, and here's the info that everybody wants. And at least I feel like I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I also don't want to just be the instruction manual. So how do you find that balance? And what Steve was talking about was a few months ago, I started trying to learn DaVinci Resolve just for fun, not because I'm doing the whole crazy, like I'm switching editing apps or anything. And what I found was every time I tried to look up something on YouTube, because when you first learn something like a new piece of software, you're just essentially Googling and YouTubing alongside it every time you need to do anything, like how to add a title, how to export, how to whatever, do anything in this application. Every time your workflow comes up on something that would just be second nature in like Final Cut Pro, then I need to turn to Google and YouTube to try to figure it out. And what I found was just annoyance. And I have noticed this with, I've also, and the other things that I've been trying to learn from scratch lately, it's like every time I just want to learn some of the basics, you kind of have to sift through a 12-minute video that really does have 2 minutes of like actual info in it. And that's fine if it's presented as a vlog, but when it's presented as like how to do this, and then the first 3.5 minutes are just someone wheeling around on a one wheel and like not talking at all about the topic, it gets very frustrating when you're like, please just tell me how to do the one thing. What setting do I need to change? And what I found was that learning Blackmagic on YouTube is incredibly difficult. Learning Resolve on YouTube is incredibly difficult, even though it's really popular software, because that's the kind of stuff I was finding everywhere was just like very not to the point materials. And then the actual points are blasted through not so quickly. And I'm really glad to know that, Steve, when you're trying to teach people how to use software, you're working with Lightroom or whatever it might be, you're keeping in mind the person. Like, I think a lot of people would think of someone like Peter McKinnon, for example, who, yes, he does videos where he can teach you how to do things, but at this point where he has, 6-7 million subscribers, and he's been doing it for years and years on end, people are watching for his personality. If they can learn something along the way, that's cool too, but it's definitely not the main draw is like, oh boy, I want to hear him talk about, Lightroom or something. It used to be, it's just not anymore. And then I think what happens is a lot of people see that, they like that, they start a channel, and they almost use that as their template. But in reality, that might not be modeling yourself after somebody with that type of reach and audience and experience might not be the best way, just might not be the best. I don't want to tell anyone what to do. I don't want to tell anyone what they should do. We've talked about that a lot with Heather, but these are just things I've noticed. And, talking with Steve here, it makes me feel like I'm not alone in that. So this is a good jumping off point for talking about DaVinci Resolve a little bit, because in terms of an AV help desk, one question that I get constantly is about Resolve, is about editing, what to use. I did a whole episode about this last season a while ago, and I wanted to talk more specifically about Resolve for a little bit. So instead of doing like a whole episode on this, we'll just do a section here. DaVinci Resolve. So here's the thing with DaVinci Resolve is I have absolutely nothing negative or critical to say about it at all. I know it's not perfect software. I know it's got quirks and imperfections and things. That's every software does. I have nothing in the world negative to say about Resolve. I think it's absolutely an amazing application, and I think it deserves this surge in popularity. I think Blackmagic does a really good job at trying to actually serve customers at reasonable prices, high quality software, high quality gear at reasonable prices that meet customer needs. I think they do a phenomenal job of that, even if it's not always, perfect for me. I think it's really great. The thing I want to look at is the popularity of it and figure out why so many people are suddenly like switching to it. And the thing about, I did a poll on this actually. I did a poll on the message board. I did a poll on Twitter. On my message board, I asked what editing software people used, and it was only Final Cut Pro or Resolve, and more people used Final Cut than Resolve. On Twitter, it was a little bit different. On mine, most people used Final Cut Pro, but then it was Final Cut Pro, Resolve, and then Premiere was in there. And a few people said they used something else, but they didn't let me know what it was. So Twitter was a way larger sample size, so there were more Premiere users in there than were on my message board, which is a smaller sample size, especially considering some people on the message board, because they're in a Final Cut Pro editing course, it probably makes sense that they're not editing with Adobe Premiere at that point. But I thought it was interesting, though, to see so many people using Resolve. And if you've been on YouTube, if you've been on the dumpster fire known as Twitter anytime in the past year, I'm sure that you've seen people talking about switching to Resolve. And this is where I do think that even though Resolve is great, and it could be the perfect choice for a lot of people, the switchitis that people are getting is a lot of monkey see, monkey do, and it might not always be the best choice for everybody. I was listening to another podcast recently that I really like, and they were talking about Final Cut Pro versus Resolve, and one of the hosts on the podcast was essentially saying that they had tried Resolve, they used Final Cut Pro, they tried Resolve, and want to go back to Final Cut Pro, is essentially what they were saying. But the guilt was palpable through the speakers, because it was like I felt like they were trying to justify, I know that Resolve is the thing to use, I know it would be smarter, I know all this stuff, but I'm just going to stick with Final Cut Pro for right now because it's what works for me. And I just felt like you shouldn't have to justify that. If Final Cut works for you, that's it. That's the end of the story. There is no you should do something else. If you want to stick with iMovie or Windows Movie Maker or whatever it might be, if you want to get an iMac DV from 1999 and plug your camcorder in via FireWire and edit on iMovie 1, if that's what works for you, that's what you should. That's all that matters, is that it works for you. It shouldn't be you trying to justify or then feeling bad because you're not doing the thing that everyone else is doing. So I think that the danger here, if you're looking into editing software either to get started or you have software you use and you're wondering if it's the right software or should you be switching, I think the danger there is not listening to yourself and trying to follow a crowd, but it can be difficult because you might be looking at like, I just want good info, so what should I use? If you're choosing between Final Cut and Resolve, like they're both fantastic. And they might be stronger in some areas than others depending on your workflow, but I don't think you're going to be upset or sad with either of them. I'm sticking with Final Cut because it's perfect for me as a solo creator, but I do like trying to use Resolve, especially on my second channel, because based on what I do over there, it's also like I do more simple editing, so it's easier to learn editing over there, and there aren't like time crunches and things. So I've been using Resolve on my second channel a lot, and I do really love a lot about it. Resolve is super accessible. So this is like my favorite thing about it. The price is good. It's the same price as Final Cut Pro for the full version, $300 one time. That's it. There is a free version of Resolve, which is like more like you can use the free version. There's some of like the higher end effects and things that are blocked out if you use the free version, but you can still edit and export 4K video, use tons of the effects and tons of audio processing and all this great stuff. So you can more than get things done with Resolve for free, and it is Mac and PC compatible. So, if you want to use Final Cut Pro, but you're on a Windows computer, then it doesn't matter because it's not really an option, whereas then Resolve will work on either. And if you switch from Mac to PC or back and forth, you can keep your editing software. Same with, Premiere. You can keep your software and then use it on whichever operating system you're using. Resolve also has a very soft place in my heart because when I was teaching, it was one of those things where when students wanted to edit on their own, I could tell them about this free pro software that they could go download. So if they had their own computer, it didn't matter what it was, Mac or PC, they could go download this for free. And a lot of them then got hooked on Resolve because of that, because that was even though we used Final Cut Pro in the classroom, if they didn't have access to it at home on their own time during summer vacations, they were using Resolve. And then they were coming back and just wanting to use that in the classroom anyway. So that's of course I let them do that if they wanted to do that. And that accessibility of bringing pro level video editing to pretty much anyone with a computer is kind of fantastic. And I have to give Blackmagic and Resolve a lot of credit for doing that. And then the biggest thing is the training resources. What Steve talked about in the video, they're so good. I got so frustrated going down the YouTube thing of just like shoddy information buried in pointless videos that then you go to Blackmagic and you can literally get certified in Resolve on Blackmagic's site. I don't know if that matters or not, but you could go and get some kind of certification. But everything, they even give you sample footage to work with. They give you like, I'm somebody who has a Final Cut Pro course, so it behooves me for people to encourage people to edit in Final Cut Pro and then take my course so they could learn Final Cut Pro. Go to learnfinalcutpro.com. But what Blackmagic and Resolve have done is put together like a phenomenal course for free. So you can download the application for free. You can take the course and go through like every part of the editing process with sample footage for free. And obviously that's good for them because then it hooks people into their ecosystem. And now you're a Blackmagic, your Blackmagic editor for life, as the kids say. So you have these brilliant training resources. It sort of shows like, looking at the dichotomy that exists between the Blackmagic resources and what happens on YouTube, it really shows that difference between a straightforward educational thing and something that needs to compete, with an algorithm and with being clickable, because YouTube, is a nightmare to navigate in comparison, trying to just, even the thumbnails, you're just trying to learn how to export, and then you have to click on a thumbnail where someone has a crazy shocked face about like, oh my God, these settings, you won't believe these settings. Just like, I don't need to watch someone yelling at me like Mr. Beast about export settings. I just need someone with an Australian accent to calmly guide me through this, please. And that's what you get with the Blackmagic training materials. So I think that is pretty freaking awesome. And I don't know. I guess that's the Helpdesk thing. I wanted to share some of my thoughts about Resolve for anyone who is wondering about editing software to switch. And then the life hack, I guess you could say, is what Steve brought up, which is the speed editor. If you don't know what the Blackmagic Resolve speed editor is, it looks like a small keyboard. It's about the size of like an iPad, but it has a jog wheel and then a whole bunch of keys. I have mine right here. Listen to the clickiness. And then I don't think you can hear the wheel spin, but it has like this metal weighted wheel. It very much feels like if you ever edited on like beta tape to tape systems back in the day, it feels like those, like in out points, jog wheels, the whole thing. It's really nice. And it can connect to your computer through USB-C, but it also has a built-in battery and Bluetooth, so it can then work wirelessly, and the battery lasts a really long time in it. So it's super cool, and it's unfortunately only for Resolve, so you can't like commandeer it for Final Cut or anything, but it's pretty great. There's a lot of functionality, and it really does make you edit faster. It is literally a speed editor. But the reason it's so cool is because Resolve, the full license, is $300, which I think is definitely worth it, even though there's a free version. If you find yourself as somebody who wants to edit, who really wants to take editing seriously, and you're going to use it for a long time, getting the full version, just sort of removing that ceiling from your workflow, is a cool thing to do. The speed editor is $400, but it comes with a full license to Resolve. So essentially, it's only $100 more to get the editor and the full license than just the full license. And I think that is really worth it. And then you have this super awesome tool that I think is really fun to use. Maybe it's not fun for everybody. So that's kind of the little life hack there, is using the speed editor and getting that discount. Blackmagic does give you full licenses of Resolve with lots of things, not the ATEMs, but like most of their cameras and stuff will come with full licenses of Resolve. Definitely worth checking out, but also Final Cut Pro. So those are my thoughts on Resolve. I was going to originally expand that out into a whole episode, but I figured it's better to condense it here because I still am a Final Cut Pro person, but I want to make sure that you know that just because I like something and just because that's my preference as an individual doesn't mean everything else is bad, or that I would think everything else is bad. Saying something is good doesn't mean you're saying something else is bad. And so Final Cut Pro is my favorite. I love it, but Resolve is amazing and I have nothing negative to say about it. So that is pretty fantastic right there. And that takes us to our last question of this help desk right here, which is, it's not related to Resolve at all. This is from YouTube. This is from Dip Down Anime on YouTube. And they ask, my fiance and I run an anime reaction channel. We changed our setup and are sitting about 3 to 4 feet from each other. It's about a meter apart. Currently, we have the original Rode pod mics, but here and there we get picked up in each other's microphones. I haven't tried yet, but do you think this is something that could be EQ'd out? So they're essentially talking about mic bleed, one person getting picked up in the other's microphone. Should we look into something like a nice shotgun mic to get us both on one track? I don't know if I could drop $1,200 for something like the Sennheiser MKH50, but I am willing to spend money if you have suggestions, and they're currently using the Rodecaster Pro 2. So essentially what this question is asking is it possible to record 2 people with one microphone, and or how can you use 2 microphones side by side without too much mic bleed? And there are a few different answers to this, and it does kind of tie into Drew's situation where he was using the one Rode VideoMic NTG to record the two talents. It depends on the microphone. It depends on the setting. In a situation like this, what I would recommend is working with what you have, which is kind of always my advice. As much as I love gear, is always like, work with what you have and then upgrade as your specific needs become apparent. So if you're running pod mics into a Rodecaster, that's a pretty good setup that is designed to have multiple people recording in relatively close proximity. So there are a couple things you can do there, and I've run into some of these issues because for years, Heather and I did the couples table, especially in my studio, which was our weekly live stream podcast, and we were sitting right next to each other with microphones, and dealing with mic bleed and stuff was definitely a thing. Now, to some degree, it doesn't matter, because even if somebody's voice is getting picked up on the microphone next to them, the main microphone is going to be dominating, that's going to be the main thing that you hear, and the other audio is not really going to matter. You could potentially do something, if you wanted to spend a lot of time editing, you could record with the Rodecaster in multi-track, and then you could go through and cut out the parts of the track when someone isn't talking. Essentially only leave a track active or leave the audio in when the person is actually talking, and then the mic bleed will basically, you won't hear it because you're cutting that part out of the other microphone. That is very tedious though. It's not something that I would enjoy spending a lot of my time doing. So finding ways to not have to deal with that is important. 2 pod mics, 2 dynamic microphones, it should definitely be possible not to deal with mic bleed. And this is where I think really understanding your microphone's pickup pattern becomes super important, because the pod mic, like most dynamic microphones, is a cardioid pickup pattern, which essentially means there's a bubble in the front of the microphone and a little, I forget what they call it, something, it's not a bulb, but it's something out the back of the microphone. So it does pick up a little bit from behind it. And same thing, I have the SM7B right now. I'm directly in front of the microphone. If I turn the microphone, now you can't hear me. If I go behind it, you still can't hear me, but my voice comes back a little bit, and then I come around the side, you hear me again. So essentially what that means is if you have a microphone, even if it's not pointed directly at someone, but right now I'm kind of off axis a little bit from the SM7B, I'm still getting picked up. So if my microphone, say this is my microphone, well, it is my microphone because I'm talking into it, but say I'm sitting right here with my microphone and this is my main microphone and I have another one next to me. And now pretend that you can't hear that microphone, but I'm talking into it. This is the audio that's getting picked up on the first microphone I was using. So this would be the mic bleed that's getting picked up. If I take this microphone though and I tilt it away from me at basically a 45-degree angle, now my voice drops out significantly. So by taking advantage of that pickup pattern, which is usually based on 45-degree angles, so instead of having the mics sitting side by side each other, I'd imagine in this case, if you're doing an anime reaction channel, I would imagine you guys are sitting and watching something. You're sitting side by side. There's two microphones facing side by side. This was the setup that Heather and I did on the couples table for a long time. That can introduce a lot of mic bleed. But if you just take your microphones and you position them so they're essentially at 45-degree angles away from each other, that right there will eliminate so much mic bleed without you having to do anything else. And then that might solve the problem entirely, just playing with the pickup pattern of the microphone. Beyond that, you could start experimenting with the noise gate. That depends on, of course, your software and your mixer. The Rodecaster Pro 2, the Rodecaster Duo, they have great noise gates that you could actually use quite a bit. And that might help eliminate some of that mic bleed from even getting picked up because the noise gate would take it away. The original Rodecaster has a noise gate too. I always found it to be a little too aggressive. So just experiment and see what works with you. It could be a solution. And then mic positioning with a noise gate, that could probably be more than enough to get things done. And the other option of like, well, if we're worried about mic bleed, should we just use one microphone is definitely a solution too. And I have used my Sennheiser MKH50 with both Heather and I in the frame and a couple other people a couple other times. I've used it with multiple people multiple times and it works totally fine. It's not going to sound quite the same as two people having two microphones, but that is a microphone that is designed to pick up high quality audio, to be super directional and pick up high quality audio from a bit of a distance. And not every microphone can do that really well. You probably would need to process your audio more, maybe add in some voice isolation or something, reverb reduction to try to kind of eliminate some of the room tone. The tough part when doing that is because now you do have both people on the same microphone. If there's a significant difference in the volume or the tone of each person's voice, now you're both on one track with one mic. So if one person is louder than the other, there's going to be kind of an imbalance there. You can't, if you're on different channels, you can turn one person's channel up versus the other. You can EQ a mic differently for one person's voice versus another. If you're both on the same mic, that becomes a little more difficult. So I've done that sometimes, like especially for live streams on my channel. Usually it's just Heather and I, unless we're doing a mic test, it's usually just us on the Sennheiser MKH50. But if I were doing that like every day and every time we did every time we do the couples table, we have our own microphones because it just, it's like when somebody asks if they can hook up more than 4 microphones to the Rodecaster. The answer is yes. If you're doing that 3 times a year, there's ways to make it happen. If you're doing it every time you use it, even though it's possible, it's just going to kind of make your workflow harder. So I kind of wouldn't recommend the shotgun approach, although it could be worth trying. If you don't want to spend the money on the Sennheiser, I don't know that you're going to be able to get the same quality because that is what you're paying for. But the Audio-Technica, what is it, A2897? It's an Audio-Technica shotgun microphone that I've used so many times when teaching, and it's a pretty underrated mic because it's a AT897. Is that what it is? It's a $250 shotgun microphone. Yeah, AT897. And I really like it. I think it's pretty underrated. I probably should get one and do a video on my channel. It might be a good middle ground between something like the Sennheiser and, then something like the Rode VideoMic NTG, which might pick up too much room tone. So maybe play with something like that or another pencil condenser. But I would bet that just by playing with the positioning of the pod mics and possibly a noise gate with the Rodecaster Pro 2, you could get some really good results. And then the other thing, and this is something that I wish Rode talked about more, it's not a Rode only thing, but it's specifically confusing with the Rodecasters. If you go into a microphone channel on the Rodecaster and it pops up a screen that lets you choose a preset, lets you adjust your gain, all that kind of stuff, down at the bottom of that screen is where you can turn on phantom power. So it says P48 on or off. And then it also has it looks like a 0 or an O with a line through it. It looks like the Rode logo and it says on or off. And there's no explanation for what that is. That is not the Rode logo. That is, I forget what it's called, but it essentially has to do with phasing of the microphones. And so other mixers have this. It's something that's been around for a long time. It's not a Rode specific thing. It just coincidentally looks like their logo. Maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe their logo looks like that on purpose. Anyway, it's off by default, But if you ever use two microphones near each other and you notice that they sound really weird, especially if they're the same microphone, sometimes you can push that button and it'll totally fix the problem, because what happens is microphones can sometimes get out of phase. Essentially, if you look at like the waves from the microphone, if you have two microphones, if you imagine waves, like if you've seen sound waves and they go up, down, up, down, up, down, they should be in line. Like they should match, right? The frequency waves, I don't know what the technical terms are, but they should match. If a microphone is out of phase, it's almost like they're flipped. And when one microphone's wave is up, the other one is down, and they're kind of like crisscrossing. And it creates a really weird sound where one microphone will typically start sounding really thin and really weird and not super pleasant. And now, instead of having to troubleshoot that, you can literally just push that one button and then it will flip the microphone. It will like put the microphones back in phase with each other and everything's good to go. So this isn't necessarily something that would sound like mic bleed, but if you're using two microphones next to each other and you notice one of them especially is sounding really weird, and you're using one of the Rodecasters or some of the other modern mixers, like I know the Mackie has it as well, you can just, I don't know what the button is called, but it looks like the Rode logo, and it will put the microphones back in phase. It will like reverse their phasing or whatever and get them back playing nicely with each other, which is a very, very, very helpful thing to do. So those are our kind of like three sort of help desk topics today. We talked about a client situation where things went horribly wrong and how to fix that. Talked about some editing software and talked about microphones, trying to work with microphones together. I'd love to do, I'm curious, I don't know. I had fun kind of diving more in depth on something, and I would love to do more AV help desk type episodes in the future. And speaking of AV things, if you want to join my message board, the AV Lab, you can just join Patreon or YouTube channel memberships. There's links in the description. Then you get access to the message board, which is super duper fun. If you have thoughts of anything, you want to share anything, as always, you can go to himynameistom.com. And then right there on the homepage, you can leave a message, leave an audio message for the podcast, or you can send text, voice, or video as an attachment to tom@enthusiasmproject.com. And again, if you know how to help out Drew or you have any other input you want to add to any of the stuff we discussed today, please feel free to do that. And that kind of wraps it up. So thanks for sticking around. Thanks for letting me try something new with the AV Help Desk. I very, very much appreciate it. Thank you for all the questions that were submitted. And I'm really hoping we figure out Drew's saga, or maybe he makes a breakthrough and can let us know. So until next time, I hope you have a safe, happy, healthy, fun rest of your week, and I will see you next time. I meant to play the output, but instead I turned on the megaphone. I'm going to go see, and I will see you next time.
Huh?